So currently our application works very well. We tested it out in the previous lecture. We even added some extra functionality that makes no sense for the scenario that we're working with, but it's right there. And it's currently looking quite good. It looks entirely native. We see exactly what we would expect from an iOS or an Android application. However, many times we want to change the way our applications look. We want to tailor how this looks so maybe they resemble more what our brand would create. Maybe it would just be changing the functionality of a native element so it works more as we intend for a specific scenario. So for example, here I am on the list view where I am listing all of the categories with a specific progress bar. Now it looks okay and it works very well, but maybe for our scenario we want the color to be different. And maybe that's not too hard to change, but maybe we want the size of the bar to be different. We want it to be maybe taller because it's just too small for our taste. To be able to make these sort of changes, you cannot just go to your SAML code. So in this case, we are in the categories page. And in the categories page, we do see this progress bar, but if we search for the progress color, we could change it directly from here, but let's go and search for height, set the height request to 40, for example, and we see nothing happening. If we set the color, we do have the ability to set it to teal, and it does change, but the height request is really not doing anything to how tall the actual element is. So we set it to 400, we still don't see any changes. And just to show you that this wouldn't change anything to the actual progress bar, I will go ahead and run this, and you see how it remains the exact same thing. So in this lecture, what we're going to do is create a custom renderer from iOS. Actually, we will need to access the iOS project. So we change the height of all of the progress bars that are going to be displayed on our application. So let's go ahead and do that. The first thing that I recommend you do is that inside of the iOS project, you add a new folder that is going to be precisely called custom renderers. So just to have your code a little bit more organized. And in here, I am going to be creating a new class, just an empty class at the beginning. And this is going to be my custom progress bar renderer. And, you know, I have a normal class and everything. And by the way, it's called progress bar. And I can rename my file from here as well. So progress bar renderer. By the way, that's a quite neat trick. If you rename one of your classes, you can do Ctrl- on Windows or Alt-Enter on Mac, and you will see the option to rename the file. So just a quick tip in there. What we have to do in here first and foremost is make this class actually be a renderer. Now, because this is for a progress bar, we need to access the progress bar renderer. So this class would have to inherit from progress bar renderer. Of course, to be able to access this, I will need a using directive. The using directive for this one is Xamarin Forms Platform iOS. So now our custom progress bar renderer class is a progress bar renderer. Now, before doing anything else and start to define what this renderer is going to do, I need to establish that this is going to be the renderer that is going to be replaced the normal renderer for a progress bar. So that is actually something that is done by defining an attribute for the namespace. So here in the namespace, before the definition of the namespace, I am going to grab assembly, and I am going to do an export renderer. Now, to be able to access this type, I need a using directive to xamarin.forms. So this export renderer, what it's going to do is allow us to set first the type of, well, in this case, the handler that is going to be the type that we want to change. In this case, this is going to be progress bar. We don't want progress bars to be the boring progress bars that they were before. By the way, I'm missing something in here. This has to be type of progress bar. So this is what we want to change. After setting this, we need to set the target. So with what are we going to be changing the normal boring render of a progress bar? And in this case, this is going to be, of course, our custom progress bar renderer, which also needs a using directive. Now, the reason why I need the using directive, even though I'm in the exact same file, is because we are defining this outside of the namespace. So this execution has not yet entered the namespace. We do need the using directive of here, but you can see how it's the exact same namespace that we have down here. And just like this, we have defined that this namespace is going to be the export renderer that is going to change the progress bar's boring renderer for our super awesome custom progress bar renderer. That does nothing so far, but that is going to be doing something a little bit more interesting than the usual renderer. Now, because we have just inherited from progress bar renderer, now we have access to some virtual methods that we can override, including the layout subviews method. Now, the layout subviews method is the one that is going to be executed as the layout is created. So what we can do in here is immediately here change the height of our progress bar. What I will do is set float that is going to be defining the X attribute. So how many times are we going to be scaling on the X axis? And this is going to be 1. Of course, I have to set the F because this is a float. And I'm going to do the same thing for the Y. How many times are we going to be scaling on the Y axis? Let's try with 4. So it's going to be remaining the same on the X axis, but it's going to be 4 times as tall. And now, these are just the variables, but the place where we define them is in a transform. We're going to be applying a transform to our layout. So for that, we're going to be needing a CG affine transform variable. Of course, for that, we will need a using directive. So CG is, of course, core graphics. This is entirely iOS. This has nothing to do with Xamarin, but we are going to be defining a transform, and the transform is going to be CG affine transform dot make scale. So this is how we're going to be defining how are we going to be scaling this layout. So in the X, we are going to be scaling it X times, in this case 1. So it's going to remain the same. And in the Y, we're going to be scaling it 4 times. So 4 times as tall. And then just set the transform, which is a property of the view, to this transform. Just like this, we have set how is it going to be scaling those elements. However, if you were to run this right now, it would seem that it made no difference at all to create this renderer. The reason is that this layout subviews is only going to be called once at the beginning. And every time the view is updated, in our case the progress bar, for example, when we set the binding to that element, is going to be redrawn. Thankfully, there is a method that we can override that is called onElementChanged. So yeah, it's every time the value is changing, any value inside of this element changes, it means that the entire element changed, this method is going to be called. And all we have to do is call the layout subviews method again, so it is scaled again, and that is it. So now our render is ready. We can just go ahead and run our application, and this time, notice, immediately we see that our progress bars have this updated height. these are 4 times as tall now that we have added this renderer. So that easy it is for us to create a renderer. Our own customized renderer in this scenario for iOS. Now this is a very simple scenario. We are just changing the height of an element. Let me go ahead and in the next lecture talk about what else you could do with these iOS renderers. So what we are going to do in the next lecture is, in addition to changing the height, we're going to be changing the color depending on the progress. So those that have greater progress may be red, and those that have smaller progress may be green, as in I'm not spending that much in that category. So in the next lecture, let's go ahead and implement some new functionality to our custom renderer on iOS so far.